All right, so we've started recording. We've got it going, I believe, over on Facebook successfully this time. You can see my face, I hopefully small, over here in the corner, and I've got the questions here in the middle. This is our weekly Q&A for April 30th, 2020. Really quick disclaimer. I am a nutritional therapy practitioner. I'm a certified AIP coach. I do not diagnose or treat any disease. And the information that I present here is for general information only, should not be used as a substitute for medical advice. Make sure you consult with your own medical provider before making any changes to your diet, your supplement, your medication, or your exercise programs. The questions that we are going to talk about today, I have 4 different people submitted questions, so 4 questions altogether. This first one, Leticia is the person who submitted the question, and she put them in 3 separate questions, but I'm going to kind of approach it all in one answer here. And it was to talk about some general information about how autoimmune disease is connected to seasonal allergies, and if there are specific foods or practices that can help prevent or alleviate allergic reactions. And she points out, of course we want to avoid things, but we have to breathe. And then she asks if my advice applies to kids and adults alike. And the first thing, I'm going to answer that last question first, because I think I can answer that very generally. And that is that I actually have to say my advice that I would give generally doesn't apply generally to anybody. So I think that everything needs to be personalized. I can share some generalizations and some places that I think many people would benefit and where places to start. But there are very few things that I ever really say that I think apply to everybody universally. So there are differences between kids and adults and what they need, not only in terms of just physically, like what their bodies need, but also in terms of developmentally and socially and emotionally. We live in a complicated world, and adults maybe can handle some elements of that complicated world a little bit differently than kids. We have to look at the whole person. Kids don't live in a vacuum. We don't either, but we're grown-ups, and so there's some things that I think we can kind of suck it up. But when it comes to kids, asking them to pretend that things like birthday cake and pizza parties and potato chips don't exist is really unfair sometimes. So in general, no, my advice does not apply to them alike. Now, more specifically, when we're talking about, Leticia's really specific question here about seasonal allergies and how it is or is not connected to autoimmune disease, this is, at the very basic level, the connection between the two is that they both involve the immune system, and they both involve the immune system misfiring, to put it in a simple way. An autoimmune disease, the immune system is treating yourself, your body, some part of your body, as if it needs to be addressed as an invader. The immune system has misfired, is dysregulated, and the body is bearing the brunt of that. In seasonal allergies, it's also the immune system responding to something it's perceiving to be more harmful than it really is. But the mechanism is quite different. Seasonal allergies are an annoyance, but they aren't destructive. They aren't productive. They aren't progressive. Seasonal allergies can be very, very frustrating, and they can certainly contribute to other health problems. But autoimmune diseases are, in general, much more serious. Many people suffer from both, but not everybody. So I never want anybody to think that just because there are commonalities and there even are some shared genetics, that, if someone has seasonal allergies, it means they're more likely to develop an autoimmune disease. That is not true. So we see some connections, but we also see some very significant differences. And we also know that treatments or ways to manage them are not the same, but there are some overlaps. So then leading into Leticia's second question, are there specific foods or practices that can help prevent or alleviate allergic reactions? I don't know that this has been medically studied, but I certainly have a lot of anecdotal evidence from folks saying that they found that over time, their seasonal allergies impacted them far less when they got their autoimmune disease under control. anecdotally, again, I don't have, you know, science to like back this up, but I definitely know people who have found that, you know, over time, from one season to the next, 1 year to the next, they look back and they can say, yeah, my seasonal allergies bothered me more when my autoimmune disease, excuse me, was also raging out of control. But when I did whatever I needed to do to start to better manage my autoimmune disease, and whatever they needed to do might have been to, you know, adopt AIP, to include some supplements, to change their lifestyle, to do all of the above, to start or stop some medications. You know, once they've done those things, they found that seasonal allergies did naturally start to improve. There's also a lot of variation in seasonal allergies too over one's lifetime. I think that you know, especially for women, where our hormones are very different at different stages of our life, that seasonal allergies can have a different impact to us at different times of our life. And that's true for everybody, but that can also be a factor as well. So I know I haven't really answered the question, are there specific foods or practices? I'm going to actually touch on this in one of the later questions. It might be the very next one, if I remember correctly. You know, eating a lower histamine diet, if you're experiencing a lot of seasonal allergies, can help. That is a practice, you know, that can help people who have a lot of seasonal allergies. Eating a lot of a really good nutrient dense diet, eating a lot of foods that really support your body's ability to clear histamine can be helpful there. One of the number one things we tell people who have some challenges with clearing histamine is to make sure they're eating their organ meat, specifically liver, because liver helps to build the enzyme that breaks down histamine. So these are not, you know, this is not medical advice, and these are not like, you know, straight up cures, but these are things that are good practices. So eating a good nutrient dense diet and managing your autoimmune disease can definitely help with anything that is a challenge for you. So I hope that helps. I'm going to go to the next question because it kind of relates, actually. Gail submitted this question. She asked, can you talk about low histamine and low FODMAP and what reasons someone might consider using this approach in addition to the AIP? And she had a few other notes to her question, talking about how she's seen a lot of people asking about this and what resources would I suggest. And I think I want to just sort of first address it on the very basic level of, you know, we hear about these things. What are the reasons why someone would consider using these? Well, low histamine plays into what I was talking about with Leticia's question before. So histamine is something your body naturally produces. It's normal. This is not anything to be concerned about. Histamine is part of your immune system's response. The times when we notice histamine, when it becomes an annoyance to us, an irritation, is when our body is producing or experiencing an overload of histamine, and that has more than it can actually break down and clear out at a time, which it can do. You know, your body will break apart the histamine, clear it out, but when it can't do that fast enough, we get uncomfortable. So pretty much everybody, whether they experience like kind of seasonal classic allergies or not, can relate to what that might feel like when your body is like reacting to something in the air, getting red eyes, getting sneezy, getting itchy, getting a feeling of like something, my body doesn't like something. That's histamine. That is, in a nutshell, that's histamine. And again, it's natural, and most of the time we don't even notice it as part of our system. But when your body is not able to clear that out as fast as it's building up, then you get that irritation. We also get histamine in some of our food. So not only does our body produce it, but it comes in what we eat. So when we hear people talking about, I need to eat low histamine, it's not necessarily that they have to avoid certain foods, although that may be part of it, because there are some foods that just naturally have a higher amount of histamine or are known to be what's called histamine liberators. And I won't get into all the details on that. But what it really means when you need to be mindful of your histamine load and what you eat, it's more about the practices around how you eat. And essentially what it boils down to is that histamine in food will build up if the food is not completely fresh. So if the food has been fermented, there's more histamine in it. So even though fermented foods are a great thing on AIP, if you are having trouble clearing histamine, then you may not feel good when you eat some fermented foods, and you may need to minimize that. Also, histamine builds up in leftover foods. Food's been cooked and then held at room temperature, or at even the safe, food safe temperature, or in the refrigerator for a couple days. Then when you go to eat it, you might feel like there's more histamine in it than your body can tolerate and can clear out at a time. So when I'm working with folks who are experiencing that histamine overload, and we're trying to kind of get to the root cause of that at the same time, in the meantime, a lot of times what I will have them do is focus on eating in a way that they can eat just fresh foods, which is tough because we're really big fans of batch cooking, right? And eating leftovers and double cooking. So I usually have them start to use their freezer a lot more, because freezing will halt that histamine buildup process. So you can still batch cook, but you're going to then need to take those extra portions that you're not going to eat right away and freeze them rather than put them in the refrigerator. Low FODMAP is different. Low FODMAP refers to, the F in it is fermentable. I won't even try to name what all those others are, but they're fermentable specific types of carbohydrates and plant foods that cause digestive issues because they can ferment in the body. They're not at all harmful. So that's important to understand. Neither histamine nor FODMAP are something that all people should be concerned about and stay away from. These are not harmful foods. They're more of like an irritant in certain people at certain times. The people who will find that high FODMAP containing foods that contain a lot of FODMAPs, irritate them are people who often have an intestinal bacterial overgrowth called SIBO, so small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Sometimes it's not even to the level that might be diagnosed. Maybe they don't even have they don't have all the classic symptoms, but they still find that some of these higher FODMAP foods irritate them if they eat them in a large quantity. So there's low FODMAP, and then there's really just being like mindful of FODMAPs. So if you have bloating and gas after meals sometimes, and you have a lot of, kind of maybe bowel movements that don't feel regular, sometimes they're loose, sometimes you're constipated, it might help to take a look at the low FODMAP lists that are out there. And the best resource for that, the one that I always tell people to go to, is actually the university. It's in Australia. It's Monash University, Monash. They have an app, an iPhone app. It's not free because they have to pay for the research that they do, but I really trust their lists because they're actually running the analysis in their lab. So they actually know which foods really are low and which ones are high FODMAP. So you can use that resource to help figure out, well, which of these foods, not necessarily do I need to avoid, but which ones do I need to be aware of, and see how I feel and how much of them they can have. Now, what reasons would someone consider using these approach? I think I've kind of answered that, but I want to caution here that I actually don't ever recommend people just start adding in extra restrictions on top of AIP unless they really have thought carefully and maybe are collaborating with somebody else, with a practitioner, with a coach, before they start doing that, because more restrictions are not going to magically lead to healing. In fact, they might be counterproductive. So if you think about it, if you feel like I really need to be eating low histamine, that might give you a short-term, improvement in some symptoms, but it's not getting to the root of the problem of why is your body not able to clear those histamines? Because a person should be able to eat leftovers and fermented foods without them causing a problem. Same thing with the FODMAPs. When I meet somebody who says I can't eat any high FODMAP foods without feeling miserable, I know that we need to figure out what is the root cause of that and try to address that. And that's probably going to mean that they need to work with somebody more than just me as a coach, but I can at least help them, get organized in their understanding their symptoms and rule out some things and, help them figure out what testing they need. So both of these approaches should be short-term. They should be for a very specific purpose. They should be for a short period of time, as I said. And I really strongly recommend that they work with somebody else before they start eliminating additional foods. Again, a good resource for low FODMAP is the Monash University, if you do want to start to investigate that. But again, I don't want anybody just going and getting a low FODMAP list and an AIP list and then now cutting their diet down even further and never looking back. Again, it should be an intervention that you use to start to kind of do a little bit of your own diagnosis and also to just feel better, but not to just be the solution for the rest of your life. All right, Gail, I hope that helps. All right. The next question, the person who put this in said not to use their name, so this is anonymous. It's a good one. This person's asking about colonoscopies and colonoscopy prep. And I have a colonoscopy coming up, and I haven't had one since my first one in 2012. Do you have any advice about the prep? I have suprep. First of all, I will tell you I've used suprep and I liked it a lot. It's weird to say that I like a prep, but I had a lot of colonoscopy preps because I also had some surgeries in between. So there was a period of time where I was doing a lot of prep to clean things out. And suprep was the one I actually thought was the easiest to deal with. So that's good if that's what your doctor is giving you from my just general like patient to patient, opinion. I've heard people mention adjusting their diet a couple days in advance. Is that recommended? What about diet after the procedure? I feel concerned about the experience negatively affecting my gut health. Overall, I would just love to hear your thoughts or recommendations to help support my gut health throughout the experience. All right, great question. And first of all, I'm going to be the voice that's going to say, don't worry about this. My personal experience with colonoscopies has actually been that, if anything, they positively affected my gut health. And maybe I'm unusual, but I found that after the colonoscopy, I actually felt like things were a little bit better balanced. It's like the bacteria kind of all got washed out and I got to reset it, rebuild, restart. We hear so much doom and gloom about how, if we disrupt our gut microbiome, it's like the end of the world. In reality, your gut microbiome actually comes back really quickly. They've done studies where they look at like how quickly it reverts back to the state that it was in before. And it's pretty fast. And in fact, that's the frustration. That's part of why, taking a probiotic or even getting a fecal bowel transplant isn't quite as effective as we might imagine it would be. And that is because the gut microbiome kind of wants to stay where it is. It's going to rebound relatively quickly back to the way it was before. So, I'm not everybody. And again, this is anecdotal, but my experience has been that I usually feel, pretty good after the colonoscopy. Again, that's not universal. I mean, I'm sure there'll be people who will watch this, listen to this and say, no, I had the opposite experience. But, if you already have digestive issues and you've already got you're experiencing some symptoms, and you don't say that if you are, but it is sometimes it's like just a fresh start. So I wouldn't worry about it if you need the colonoscopy because you have IBD and you need to have monitoring. It's really important you do that. You want to know what's going on in there. You want to make sure that you're getting screened for colon cancer. You want to make sure that, you've got a clean view of what's going on, which is the other reason that prep is really important. So people also get concerned about, I don't want to take the prep from my doctor. I want to do it naturally. The most important thing about a colonoscopy prep, honestly, is doing it well so that they can get good pictures. Because otherwise the whole experience, that icky, not fun, cleaning yourself out, drinking all that prep, was all for nothing, if they don't get a good view of your colon. So I think it's just, not the time and place to try to do the most natural prep in the world. Now, of course, if you've had a bad experience with a prep, you don't want to just submit yourself to that again, but if you haven't, use the best one that you can get. So, suprep, again, I've used it and I thought it was great. I have no complaints about that. Most recently, the last one I did, my doctor wanted me to, did something that was a little bit different. I had to mix something with, I think the suggestion was Gatorade. And I was like, I'm not going to do Gatorade. It has artificial colors and, things that I just know are not necessary. But the manufacturer gave me the directions on there that I could use lemonade instead. And I thought, well, that's perfect. Because I know that like the sugar is not anything to be worried about. It's going to flush right out. I just didn't want the artificial colors. And so I got some organic lemonade, like from Trader Joe's, and that's what I mixed it with. So whatever prep you use, just make sure you follow the directions. You know, don't take shortcuts, do the whole thing so you get a really good clean scope. In terms of your diet a couple days in advance, yeah, the directions, if the directions don't say to do that, which I thought they did for suprep, I thought it said for a couple days that you should do like a clear liquid diet the day of, maybe even a low residue diet a day or two before. It's not a bad idea, even if they don't say to do it, you know, especially if you tend to be prone to constipation. If you tend to be more prone to having loose stools, it's less necessary. But it may be not a bad idea to just for a couple of days ahead of time, just try to eat a little bit lower residue. And I have on my blog, if you just Google Gutsy by Nature, low residue, you'll find I have a blog post that I wrote on what a low residue diet that's AIP compliant actually looks like. So I'm not going to say that's a recommendation for everybody. You know, you might want to ask your doctor. And then in terms of after the procedure, what about diet? I really just recommend you go with, you know, how you feel. You'll probably find that you're not hungry right away, you know, so ease into it. Give yourself something that feels appealing, feels soothing. You know, make sure you've got maybe some bone broth already cooked and some, you know, fish or some chicken that will be easy to digest. It'll feel good. You're not going to want to eat a salad, you know, like right away or anything that'll require a lot of digestion. But in general, you'll feel like you can advance your diet pretty quickly after the procedure. That's at least been my experience all the time, is that, you know, it's really just the day of that I feel kind of like, ugh, I don't want to eat. But after that, I'm right back to, you know, appetite's back to normal. Okay, so I hope that helps. I think we have one more question and I have about 5 minutes left. So let me jump right into that. This question came from Anne. And it's one that I love. I actually probably should spend more time talking about it than just 5 minutes. I'm looking at the clock, but I definitely want to stick to the 30-minute time frame because it's one that I hear a lot. So the question goes like this: when on the AIP diet, what is the purpose of reintroducing foods that have been eliminated, since the eliminated foods are considered inflammatory and contribute to disease? Why would someone want to be eating inflammatory foods on a regular basis, even if they have been reintroduced successfully without obvious reactions? Okay, great question. And the first thing I want to say is that this is a misconception. The foods that we eliminate on AIP are not eliminated because they are contributing to disease and are inflammatory. That's not true. AIP does not stand for anti-inflammatory. AIP stands for autoimmune protocol. And inflammatory is not really even part of this. Inflammation is a natural body process. It's only when inflammation is out of control, when inflammation is not balanced with anti-inflammation, that it becomes a problem for people. So think about inflammation in the natural healing process. Imagine you cut your hand, something you can see. What happens between the time you cut it and when it's completely healed and the new skin is there? It gets inflamed. It gets red, it gets puffy. That's part of the healing process. So our aim in AIP is not to not have any inflammation, okay? That's the first thing I wanted to say in response to that. And I'm not trying to lecture here. This is a common concern people have because they hear AI and they think anti-inflammatory, or they just think inflammatory is the reason we don't eat certain foods. There are foods, though, that make inflammation worse. And those are processed foods. Those are the foods that are not really even foods. Lots of sugar, eating lots of, you know, a very unbalanced diet is going to contribute to excess inflammation. And so, yeah, we don't want to be eating those things, and nobody should be eating those things. So those would be the kinds of foods that we want you to eliminate and then just stay away from forever. But there are many other foods that are eliminated on AIP, not because they are inflammatory or because they contribute to disease, but because they could be potentially problematic for the individual. So we go on to the elimination phase of AIP, and it gives our body a chance to get quiet. We've removed all the foods we might have a reaction to, all the foods that might be kind of stirring up the pot for a variety of reasons. And there's a lot of them, you know, a lot of different reasons. Some of them are highly allergenic. Some of them, you know, just interact with the immune system in a certain way. Some of them are common food sensitivities. So we cut out all of those different foods for a period of time and then start to feel good. And then we test those foods, starting with the ones that are least likely to cause a problem when you're feeling good. So example, egg yolks are the first thing I usually have my clients start to reintroduce. And the reason I start there is because when separated from the egg white, even people who have a sensitivity to eggs are often able to tolerate egg yolks just fine. And almost the word tolerate's wrong. Like their body really responds well to them. It's not even a case of just your body tolerates it, but your body just thrives on it. Egg yolks contain a ton of nutrition. They're really nutrient dense. If you are allergic to eggs, if you have a food sensitivity to it, clearly you don't want to eat it. But if you can eat them, they're great things to include. So they are not inflammatory. They do not contribute to your autoimmune disease unless you personally have a sensitivity to them. So we eliminate the foods in order to allow our body to reset, to get quiet, to start the healing process, and then we want to carefully test them. So that then expands. If you think about some of the other foods that we eliminate and then we want to really, consider reintroducing, they're all the really nutrient dense foods. So they would be things like nuts and seeds. Those are foods that, on any list of like good foods to eat, you see listed, those are high up there. The problem for people with an autoimmune disease is that they might be sensitive to them and not know it. They might be kind of stoking the immune system in a certain way when everything else is also stoking the immune system. But when you've calmed your immune system down and when you've balanced everything else, you can actually see if you actually are insensitive to them or if you're able to eat them. And you need to test them one at a time so that you can determine what the best diet is for you. So this is a really common question that I hear a lot, like, well, if AIP is so great, why would I ever reintroduce those foods? And I think the important thing to understand is that we don't eliminate foods on AIP because they are bad. We eliminate foods on AIP because they have the potential to be problematic for some individuals. And since we don't know before we start which of those foods are going to be problematic for everyone, we have a huge list that we're going to eliminate to start with, leaving only the really good nourishing foods that we know most people tolerate just fine and do really well on and can get really healthy while they're eating those foods. And then they're at a healthy and stable place. They can now test some of those other foods and see if they can include them or not. So that is the end of our question and answer session for today. I hope this was helpful for everybody who submitted a question. I will be emailing out the recording to the people who submitted questions. And I look forward to speaking with you all again soon. Join me again next week for more question and answers. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to stop.